people who are living there now, they call themselves Jackatais, which is probably a Basque name. But they believe themselves to be a mixture of Beothuk Indian, Micmac Indian, Acadian French, maybe some English in there too. All they know about themselves is they're different, and they hold that very dear and very close to their hearts. But my own researchers suggest to me very strongly that they combine, in their mixed background, we're all mixed, they combine some of the inheritance of these Albany's early voyages. And I'm hoping somebody will go and do some DNA studies to check it out, because that would prove whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong.
You also have some archaeological evidence. You have some some stone foundations you found up north.
Well, I didn't find them, but over the last 10 to 15 years, longer than that, 20 years, a number of very strange stone structures have been found in the eastern Arctic, along the coast. They are basically much the same. They range from about 30 to 110 feet in length, 10 to 30 feet in width. And if you're looking at them from the air, you'd think that they were the blueprints of a ship's deck, the curved walls, but with the ends cut off. And this is, in effect, what they really are. The archaeologists have never been sure of what they were. They've assumed that they must have been built by Inuit or pre-Inuit people, they were precursors of the Inuit. It never seems to have occurred to them they might have been built by Europeans. But I am convinced they were built by Europeans, and that these were the foundations for what I could term boat-roofed houses. And boat-roofed houses were very common and still are used in many parts of Orkney and Shetland. The ships or the boats, the vessels that these people used across the Atlantic were skin boats, big ones, 50 foot and above. And they were sheathed with walrus hide. What they did was they would sail across from, say, Iceland, when they were living there, to Greenland, and then even on to Baffin Island. And it's a long way, so they would stay the winter. And then they would have the next summer to hunt. Well, during the winter, where were they going to live? You know? What they did was built these stone foundations, 3 or 4 feet high, bring their boats ashore, turn them upside down on top of the foundations, and there you were. Presto, you had a house. Presto, your ship was looked after in the winter. And this, I believe, is the origin of these particular structures. And they're accompanied by massive pillars, massive beacons that range from about 8 to 14, 15 feet high. They're cylindrical. They're 5 to 6 feet in diameter. And they are found in close association with these so-called longhouse structures. The interesting thing about the pillars is, the beacons, there's a trail of them all the way from Newfoundland, up the Labrador coast, Greenland, Iceland, and to Orkney and Shetland. And they're almost identical. So it's pretty clear that whoever built one of them anywhere was associated with the people who built the others.
And sort of what time are we looking at? Because if the Norse people came here...
990, year 1000, depending on what they're talking about, Thorfinn Karlsefni or who. These people were here at least living here and living in the Atlantic region at least 150 years earlier. But, people say this is extraordinary, that these people would be able to do this. But that's because modern man is so bloody egocentric. We think that our ancestors were a bunch of dimbos, primitives, we like to call them. Well, they didn't think that. These guys had been sailing the North Atlantic for probably 1,000 years. They knew everything there was to know about seamanship. Their boats were extremely good sea boats. They weren't fast, but they were very, very safe. Bloody unpleasant to sail in, because they didn't have cabins, so you were cold and wet half the time. But they were used to that. That was normal. They could navigate using the stars and various other methods. They didn't have electronic devices that beamed them down from satellites. But they could get where they wanted to go. For them, it was easy stuff. They could sail back and forth across the North Atlantic as easily as we drive around on our paved highways in our modern new cars.
How does that sort of thing relate to Canada today? I mean, part of the Canadian experience, Canadian psyche, is the wilderness experience. Since most of us live in the city today, is that still a relevant thing to the way we live today, do you think?
Well, if you live in the city, you can't possibly conceive of what it means, what it is to live close to nature. We live as in opposition to nature. Nature is our enemy. We have to cut down the trees, clear the ground, dig holes, and build gigantic monuments of steel and glass. We have lost touch with nature, and nature is our parent. To lose touch with nature is probably to lose touch with our chances for survival. I think that I don't really know if I'm answering your question, but I think it's very important that people realize that we're becoming aliens on our own planet. And we have to reverse that process if we're going to survive.
What do you see? Are you optimistic about the future of this country?
Per se, sure. I don't know what it'll be called 10 years from now. what kind of an agglomeration it'll be. I suspect it's going to be sort of a uniformly commercialized monstrosity on the American model. But that's a hideous prospect.
That's pretty unfortunate.
It's pretty unfortunate.
Where do you see the Arctic, since you concentrate a lot about that in your writings?
Well, the Arctic is a huge area. It's circumpolar, but around. Parts of it will continue to be exploited mercilessly. Not as mercilessly as parts in the south, because it doesn't have the kind of exploitation possibility. You know, we can't go in and burn down all the forests, because in the high Arctic there aren't any. But we can go in and we can dig holes all over the place, and we can contaminate it. We'll go on exploiting it for wealth, for gain, for greed. You know, we're the greed-driven animal. The only animal in the world that has ever existed, as far as we know, who is motivated primarily by greed. So wherever there's anything we can find that we can make a buck out of, we're going to go and we're going to get it. So I don't think the Arctic is safe. Nothing is safe.
Well, it's most unfortunate. To sort of talk about Canadian culture for a minute, what do you think it is that binds us besides ice hockey across this great divide?
I was going to say perhaps a common aversion to our various parts. The centre, Ontario, particularly Quebec, regards the perimeter, east and west, as sort of backwoods cousins, you know, who haven't got the brains to come out of the rain. People in the west regard, in the east, regard Ontario in the centre as a greedy, acquisitive master race, or would-be master race. We don't have a hell of a lot in common, despite the fact that we've got a railroad linking us. Nowadays we're going to get rid of that as fast as we can. What we probably will have and should have is a sense of unity in a world threatened by disaster. That should help to hold us together. One of the strongest binding factors in the world is fear, apprehension. And if we recognize the fact that we're in trouble, that everybody is in trouble, maybe that'll bring us together. Maybe we'll start working together instead of against each other. What a happy thought.
That's great. How do you think we can promote this country? How can we get Canadians going out there to see various parts of this country instead of going down to the U.S. or spending their dollars in the Caribbean?
I don't know. First of all, we have to take all American television off the air. That should be fairly easy. We simply sabotage all the satellites. I can get out there with my little .22 rifle, you know, and bring them down. Boom, 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 boom. No, actually, there's no answer to that one, really. Except to develop somehow individually, within ourselves, a sense of worth. We need to feel we're personally worth something. And if enough of us feel that way, then we begin to feel that our country, our nation, whatever you want to call it, is worth something. And that way you can build up a unifying element that may save our necks.
So we're all in this together.
Yep, sure are.
Mm-hmm. What, on a lighter note, what sort of Canadian musicals artists do you listen to? Like, who do you think reflects this country?
Well, it's hard to say. I think that Cape Breton music really has an enormous impact. You know, we're talking about unity. There is unity in this country. Cape Breton, for instance, and most of Nova Scotia, and certainly Newfoundland, know who they are. Nobody has to tell them. Nobody has to say, read books or soak yourself in culture. They've got it. They know who they are, and they're happy with the knowledge. It's the rest of us that don't know who we are.
But is that because they have a stronger sense of community? Because they're not as...
It's because they've been rooted there for a long time. You need roots.
Right.
And these are well-rooted communities. The West Coast, we're not well-rooted here. The native peoples are. But the European people of European stock aren't. We're from all over the bloody shop, you know. And we come and go like the spring breezes. So who are we? We don't know. But the people in the Far East, as I call it, of the maritime regions of Canada, they know who they are. And we should pay some attention to what they have to tell us.
There's some good lessons to be learned from them.
Right.
So you think that they're a model for the Canadian identity if we want to know ourselves?
They could be. They have an identity. You know, when you go to, and you ask a Newfoundlander where he's from, you don't say that.
Mm-hmm.
You say, where do you belong, my son? And he'll tell you, he says, I belongs to Heart's Content. You know, he belongs, and that's the essence of the matter. When Canadians begin to feel they really belong to this country, then the country will belong to them, and not until.
On another Canadian note, I'm thinking about outdoor activities and all that. What do you do besides writing? When you're not writing, what sort of activities do you get up to?
I'm a watcher. I'm a looker. I go out and walk around with my dog and watch what the dog's doing and pay attention. I watch what the other birds and the other animals are doing. I'm an animal. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm a human animal, but I'm an animal. And I associate with the other animals as much as I do with the humankind. And I observe them. I'm curious about them. I allow my curiosity to be satisfied by what they do. I dig in the ground, I grow stuff, I soak in the world around me and feel, happy that I'm part of it.
Are you still an avid bird watcher? I know that your uncle influenced you a bit. He was an ornithologist.
Yeah, I'm not a bird watcher in the sense of a collector of statistics.
No.
But I watch all right. Wherever I'm out and something's happening that's in life around me, I'm observing it. Sometimes with envy, when I watch the degree of freedom that many animals still have, as opposed to the degree of imprisonment that we've put on ourselves, I get envious of them. In fact, I'm going to come back as a raven. That's my reincarnation.
Is there a place you would recommend to Canadians, a couple of places, if they wanted to see what's going on out there in this great country?
Anywhere. Your own backyard. You don't need to get in a travel mode and fly around in bloody big airplanes, whatever. Walk out in your backyard. Get down low. Look at the ground around you. Look at the small plants. You'll find the place is alive. It's crawling with life. And if you don't say, yuck, that's a bug, if you say, hey, there's a living thing, look what it's doing.
Yeah.
Look at the peculiar way that it behaves. Then you're in touch.
That reminds me of a poem Walt Whitman once said about that, about getting down at the level of
Blades
the grass.
of grass, yeah.
And observing it, and
Sure.
there's a whole different world out there. Is there anything that... I've got to look at my question, I'm sorry. Oh yes, in your book, The Serpent's Coil, can you tell the viewers your experience about the foundation tugs?
Well, that's a huge subject. I
Is
can't
it?
do that in 10 seconds.
Okay.
But way back, 30, 40 years ago, I became involved with the East Coast salvage operations and became enamored. I fell in love with the kind of people who manned these old-fashioned tugs. I went out in the North Atlantic in any kind of weather. And I wrote 2 books about them, Serpent's Coil and, what was the other one? Gray Seas Under. They were admirable people because they were people of adversity. They didn't try to beat, conquer, or control nature. They knew they bloody well couldn't. If they were going to survive, they had to learn how to get along with nature. And they did. And that's why they were such great heroes.
Are you having any more of your works made into movies?
Don't know.
No?
Yes, as a matter of fact, one of my short stories is probably being made into a feature now.
Are you
But
happy?
you never know with movies,
No.
For every movie that finally gets made, 500 get started and die still.
Are you happy with what's been made in Hollywood about your books?
No. Well, fortunately, most of my movies have not been made in Hollywood. A number of them have been made in Canada. The best one is probably Never Cry Wolf, which was an American film, but it was made by Carol Ballard, and it was filmed almost entirely in the Yukon. And he doesn't consider it an American film, and neither do I.
And finally, I'd like to know, on behalf of the Red Wire magazine, which is a magazine for Native use, what advice do you have today for young Natives out there?
Try not to be like white men. Turn your back upon white culture, European culture. Your own culture managed to serve you very well for thousands of years. Current white European culture is just going to do nothing but drag you down.
That's great. You can edit this.
Didn't build one in Saskatchewan.
I thought. Oh, I see. I knew that you built a house out in
Northern Ontario.
Northern Ontario. Okay, because that was my concern. I thought, well, how did you build a house in Saskatchewan? I know you've got the boreal forest up north, and I know you can build a house out of hay. But correct me if I'm wrong, you had no experience building a house before that?
No, never built a house, but I needed a house. Didn't have any money. It was after the war. So I got hold of a piece of property and built a log house, with a beautiful foundation, full-size foundation, which I dug with a shovel. It took me 2 months to dig the foundation of the bloody place. Anyway, that house is still standing.
Still to this day?
I don't live in it anymore. My first wife does so. When it came to choice between the house and me, she chose the house.
Well, I guess that's about it. I can't think of
There you go. I'm Farley Mowat, and what you're watching out here is the takeoff of beaver airplanes flying. I'm Farley Mowat, and what you're watching out here is the takeoff of beaver airplanes flying off to the wilderness. I wish I was in one of them. Hi, I'm Farley Mowat, and you're watching Out There. I guess maybe you've cured him of the habit.
He doesn't need the golf course. He doesn't need the golf course.
He doesn't need the money either.
He doesn't need the money. So
But the idea of accumulating money is the major driving force for most people these days.
Unfortunately. They should all go camping.
What? Is that lobby? Wait a minute. Come back in. That's not lobby.
Not lobby.
No.